This meeting is now live on YouTube. You can begin.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. I am delighted that you're here, especially on a Friday afternoon, but I'm especially delighted that you are willing to join us in this work around successful transition to post-secondary, one of the 3 work groups established by the new Commonwealth Education Continuum, sponsored by CPE and supported by our team on the Kentucky Department of Education side too. So I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and Amanda to walk us through some of the details of the agenda and to share that information. And then we will take some time to introduce ourselves to one another, since we're going to be doing some important work together.
All right, well, I will start. Thank you so much, Dr. Young. And it is a pleasure to see so many of you logged in on a Friday. If your week has been nearly as crazy and busy as ours, I know you are weary, but I promise you this is well worth your time, and are so grateful for your willingness to serve. I just want to give a really brief overview of why we are coming together and where this started. So many of you, if you've been in the education field, since 2010-11, there was a P16 council that was established several years ago with the intention of bringing folks to the table to improve the education pipeline for Kentuckians from preschool through the end of college. And that has since, it was a great idea, it was a great conversation, but there wasn't a lot of action or movement, because that takes a lot of orchestrating that work and bringing folks together. So it kind of died off, although I will say Northern Kentucky continued theirs with the foundation and support and are doing some really incredible work. But if you've heard President Aaron Thompson talk at all, in any of his talks, he is very passionate and adamant about a continuum approach of preschool through what he calls P20 and into the workforce. And so he, along with Commissioner Glass from KDE and Lieutenant Governor Coleman, joined forces, and that's literally what it says in our resolution, joined forces to come together, bring folks to the table and really talk about our continuum from preschool all the way through advanced degrees and into the workforce. Knowing that that is a big order, tall order, and there's leaky parts of our pipes that we, in our education pipeline, that we can definitely improve. We narrowed our focus to kick off this work into the area that we're focused on now, around that transition from secondary into post-secondary, or even folks who have come out of the military or adult learners in that transition into post-secondary. But the major focus is really, how do we get more students into a post-secondary world, whether that be a 2-year, 4-year degree, credentialed military, that they have a successful future ahead of them. And so 3 work groups, as Dr. Young brought up, has surfaced based on the feedback of the continuum, who met initially in January, again in March. And so with their concerns and data that we looked at, this is what was bubbled up as the priorities for this year. So the successful transition to post-secondary. The other is at early post-secondary opportunities for our students. How do we increase access and opportunity and quality of, whether that be dual credit, career pathways, IB, AP, Cambridge, work-based experience. There's lots of opportunities out there, and there's lots to still be taken advantage of and to improve. And then the third bucket, of course, is in order for our students to be prepared to take advantage, they must be ready. And part of that is having a solid, strong, high quality teacher workforce, and one that's also very diverse. And we are struggling with that. We've been pretty stagnant for a while. So that work group is working on actions around specifically around the teacher workforce and diversification of our teacher workforce. So we have 3 really super important groups going on. We extended invitations out, and we are so grateful that you are willing to serve and to help us move forward in taking action to improve this pipeline. It's ongoing. It's a continuous improvement cycle, and one that we're committed to. So with that, I will start off introductions, Dr. Young, if that's okay. I'm Amanda Ellis. I am the Associate Vice President of K-12 Policies and Programs here at CPE, and it is my honor to help lead this work. I'm not a co-lead, but to help organize and make sure it's moving for the continuum. So I will actually pass it along, if it's okay, to Jennifer, and then we can popcorn. Dr. Young, is that okay?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you today. I'm Jennifer Fraker, and I also work at CPE and support the work of the Continuum and all the work groups. So I'm happy to work alongside you all and support you as you all are needed, or as you need.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think we wanted to popcorn a little bit. Let's pop over to Sarah White, please.
Good afternoon. I am Sarah White, and I join you guys from Berea College, where I work with college and career access programs, primarily the Gear Up, the federally funded Gear Up grants, some private funding that we have received, and then some other federal grants with an overarching goal of making sure that all Appalachian students succeed around the 3 priorities that Amanda has already mentioned. And so I'm just delighted to be with you today to represent not only Partners for Education at Berea, but the Appalachian area of the work that we do. So thank you.
Perfect modeling, Sarah. Thank you so much. And so when I do call your name, if you would please do what Sarah did. Tell us who you are and what you do and what your stake in the ground interest is in this conversation around successful transition to post-secondary, please. Sherry Satterly, please.
Hi, I'm Sherry Satterly. I'm the Assistant Superintendent and Chief Academic Officer in the Danville Independent School System. In my former life, I was a high school guidance counselor, so this is very near and dear to my heart, transition to whatever post-secondary looks like. But more so for my community, I see the transition, but then I don't see the sticking, so the steadying. So I'm really invested in how do we get them there, but how do we get them to stay there?
Excellent.
And I'm just really excited to be here.
Excellent. Sticking and staying. We'll have to figure that into some kind of a slogan. Thank you. Samantha Reynolds.
Hello, I'm Samantha Reynolds. I'm the Workforce Development Training Specialist at Henderson Community College in Western Kentucky. And primarily I work with business and industry and opportunity populations by way of our United Way partners and the Kentucky Career Centers to work with primarily adult learners on accelerated or traditional credit and non-credit opportunities that target getting them into the workforce as quickly as their situations allow them to. And I'm specifically really interested and engaged with trying to really talk about that adult learner population, and also, especially with Kentucky Career Center, like youth worker funding and stuff like that. There's so many funding opportunities out there to get folks back into school. And I'm super passionate about that and so excited to be a part of the conversation.
Excellent. I love the energy, and we love that adult ed conversation or adult learner conversation as well, because transition happens at different times for different folks. Glad you're here. Carolyn Noe, please.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Noe. I am the program director for the Institute for Health Innovation at Northern Kentucky University. And what I do there is K-12 outreach programming to specifically encourage students to have an interest in health careers. So I work with a lot of our local schools to come in for hands-on field trips to our simulation center. And we also do a teen health science cafe program. So I'm really interested in being in this work group because I see these awesome students. I see the amazing resources that we have at Northern Kentucky University and all of our universities in the state. And I would love to have all of those students have great opportunities.
And that sounds excellent too. I'm hearing that from Berea and from NKU. So that sounds great. Sarah Ox, please.
Hi, I'm Sarah Oaks. I'm very happy. No problem. It's very common. Happy to be with you all. I am a licensed psychologist and an assistant professor at Western Kentucky University in our psychology department. So I have some kind of layered interests, I guess. So I primarily train our graduate school psychology students. So certainly from a K-12 perspective, interested in as a school psych at core, as well as training my students how we better support those that are transitioning into higher education. And then from my role as a professor, sit on a lot of our student success strategic plans and work groups, and involved in some initiatives and some summer bridge programs of trying to work on that recruitment and retention piece from the higher ed side. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Oaks, I've got it. And yeah, lots of different layered interests on your part, Sarah. Thank you. Shauna, King Sims, please.
Good afternoon. I am Shauna King Sims, and I am in the Chancellor's Office at KCTCS, Executive Director of Transitions and Pathways. In my previous life, I was with the State Adult Basic Education GED Agency. And for the last 20-some years at KCTCS, I work with policy programming that targets educationally, economically at-risk and non-traditional populations. For example, I administer a TANF-funded contract targeting low-income single mothers. I do some work with targeting SNAP clients. I administer a contract with Voc Rehab that targets special needs students aged 14 to 21. In my unit, we also work with dual enrollment and transfer.
Okay, excellent. That is
a fair amount of guided pathways work these days. We're working with our colleges on an improved guided pathway model.
Well, Shauna, it made me think about Mary Poppins when she just kept pulling stuff out of her bag. So I think you have a lot to offer. Thank you. And Stephanie Devine.
Hey, y'all. Great to meet you. Happy Friday. I'm Stephanie Devine. I'm the Executive Director of Teach for America Appalachia. We are lucky to work across 17 districts of Eastern Kentucky with the best students on the planet. We place teachers in those districts, and now thanks to a partnership with folks at Berea and SESC, we're working with 17 college success coaches as well. Our goal is that by 2030, twice as many Appalachian students in communities where we work achieve post-secondary success, putting them on the path to economic mobility and a future filled with possibility. And like you, Dr. Young, thinking about certificate bearing all the way to 4-year when we say post-secondary success. So great to be with y'all.
Excellent. Thank you. Can't wait to hear more about that work. And Barry Lee.
Thank you, Dr. Young. I'm Barry Lee. I serve as the Director of Special Education and Preschool Programs and Social Studies Content for the Casey County School District. I'm a former high school principal, also serve as an adjunct at Eastern Kentucky University and Campbellsville University. Serve on the State Advisory Panel for Exceptional Children and Kentucky Council for Special Education Directors. I guess my focus and interest here goes back to my job as a Director of Special Education in preschool, seeing that pipeline to completion, but more importantly, as a former high school principal, knowing we are doing a great job getting students to make that decision to go to post-secondary. But we have a little saying, we want to see you at Christmas, but only for a visit. We don't want to see a lot of them moving back home. Granted, a lot of virtual courses now, but still, we want to see them staying at the university or college level or the technical training level. And so just really looking forward to the work with this group.
All right. Well, it is great to see you again, Barry. And you've heard several folks talk about their work with and interest in supporting adults, youth and adults with disabilities through that transition. And we, in our pre-meeting, talked today even to make sure that we tended to the needs of that targeted population as we move forward today too. So I think often about those underemployed and unemployed adults with autism in our communities who are looking for substantive opportunities. So I know, Barry, you'll bring that to the table along with several others. Elizabeth Mays, please.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Mays. I'm from Louisville, and I work for Edge Analytics, and I'm their education outreach director. So we build predictive models, and my role is a liaison between the school districts and the data scientists. So whether we're looking at predicting summer melt for students that are graduating and who won't show up on the college campus even though they said they were going to, or third grade reading readiness. We've done a variety of things. Unfortunately, COVID has made it a little crazier to work with school districts right now, and certainly all of the historical data, assessments and even grading and attendance, all of that's been disrupted. So we're pivoting and trying to figure out what that's going to look like. But I also serve on the Jefferson County Public Education Foundation board, And through my work there, I've gotten involved with the college access program that was started at Fern Creek High School, a Title I high school here in Louisville. And it's called Ivy Plus at Fern Creek, but they actually own the trademark to that name. And the Public Ed Foundation, we've gotten behind expanding a pilot of that for next year. And the program's going to be called Aspire Higher. And it's all about getting first generation low income students of color, helping them find the best fit and also the most money to go to college, and then also assisting them as they go on through college. So great track record at Ivy Plus, and we're excited to see if the district can push it wider.
I have so many questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I am going to save you till the end, Ryan, when I introduce myself, so I'll come back. At this time, Matthew Ruark, please.
Hello, my name is Matthew Ruark. I am in Owensboro, and I have the pleasure to serve as the Vice President for Admissions and Financial Aid at Kentucky Wesleyan College. My interest is in obviously that transition. I work with the teams who work with students both in the on-campus and online environment as they're trying to make that transition both to present opportunities, but also try to help them afford it through the financial aid lens. So excited to have all these conversations and see what we can do to move Kentucky forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm glad to have some of our private institutions engaged today. Glad you're here. Sean Lyons, please.
Yeah, speaking of private institutions, I'm the VP for advancement at Transylvania University in Lexington. I've only been here about 4 months after about 30 years down where Sherry is in Danville at Center College. Early in my career, I was in college admissions. Now I'm in the fundraising end of things, so the connection may not be quite as obvious, but definitely interested in removing barriers to access, but also improving persistence and retention rates across various post-secondary opportunities. In my free time, I happen to be a member of the Pritchard Committee. Was actually a staff member of theirs in the early 90s when things were hot. So it's been a long interest for me.
Excellent. So glad to meet you. Bob Sexton, we all miss Bob, so I'm sure you guys do too. And I'll have to just put in a little family plug. My son Tyler Young works for you around the corner in communications. Handsome, smart, scruffy beard. Sorry.
I appreciate you making the connection. I've met him. Glad to know.
Don't tell him I mentioned the beard. Ben Branstadter, so glad to see you twice in one day.
Thanks, Lou. My name is Ben Branstadter. I'm the president of Branstadter Carroll Incorporated. We're a regional architecture and engineering firm with offices in Lexington, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Dallas, and soon Charleston, South Carolina as well. I appreciate Lou allowing me to continue to serve on this. I am now the former chair of the Council on Post-Secondary Education. So that's where we saw each other this morning on Zoom, but I do have a passion for finding ways to get students just to continue to get to college and earn the degree so that the CPE can fulfill their strategic agenda, which is to get 60% of the Commonwealth having a post-secondary education degree by 2030.
We are delighted, Ben, that you're going to continue this work to engage yourself in that passion work and to parlay that great learning from CPE into ours. So glad you're here. Hello, Ebonyuldrow.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ebonyuldrow. I'm the Assistant Provost for Adult Learning and Degree Completion at the University of Louisville. And I've been in higher education for about 15 years now. I've been in both private and public and for profit and nonprofit. And so I've seen quite a bit over the last 15 years, both in changes and new additions. I personally am interested in this particular committee because of my focus on adult learners. While we know that there is a larger population of adults in Kentucky that have zero post-secondary experience, So they're a little bit different from those that are coming right out of high school, but still those barriers may be a little different. There still are barriers, as Sean mentioned, for these students to overcome. And with adults, it's even more difficult because they have so much time in the workforce and various other family constraints and things like that. So I'm interested in successful transition and what that looks like. It must include the first time adult freshmen too, when we think about this, and I'm here to give voice to that. So my goal here is to assist in creating those pathways for all students, including my adult students, to become credentialed and quickly and productively, and how they can quickly get into the workforce here in Kentucky. I'm a strong proponent of certificates and prior learning assessment. So you may hear me talk about that over our 9 months together. So I'm excited to be with you all and look forward to our outcomes.
Excellent. So am I. That sounds wonderful. And Jennifer and Amanda, we still have Mary to go here, but I'm just taking stock. We've got 2 from Louisville, we've got Appalachia, we've got Northern Kentucky, we've got West Kentucky, we've got Central Kentucky. Nice job. Thank you, everyone. Mary, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mary Jackson of Gear Up Kentucky, which is we are the state grant. I heard Sarah and Stephanie mentioned the other grant and there's a couple of other grants in Kentucky. They're partnership grants, but we're with the state grant, and we are housed underneath the Council on Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. I'm sorry, someone just started mowing. I said, as soon as I start introducing myself, there's going to be background noise and it's going to be distracting. So excuse me. But I think everyone is probably familiar with Gear Up and what we do. I'm a regional program coordinator. So I supervise a region of schools that are mostly rural school districts here in Kentucky. And basically we are here to try to ensure post-secondary success with all of our students. And I heard Stephanie say that she has the best students on the planet. I'm going to beg to differ. I think we have the best students on the planet. I come to you all with about 15 years of experience in higher education as well. I've worked in a variety of positions, including administrative positions. And I've also been an instructor. I have a background in the arts. I've also worked with students in a variety of populations and in various types of students. I've worked with urban students. I've worked with rural students. I worked at a college in Appalachia where the average age, it was a 4-year institution, and the average age student was 26. And I had a class where there was my youngest student was 17 and my oldest student was 52. So I have a variety of experiences, and what I am most interested in, particularly in my service to this particular group, is I find myself coming across a lot of students who are just unaware of all the possibilities out there when it comes to what they can learn, what they can focus on when it comes to post-secondary. And I would like for us to come up with ways to expose students outside of what they're traditionally told they should do. And not saying that being a firefighter or a teacher is important, because Lord knows we need more teachers, right? But with a lot of our students, that's all they know.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm really, really interested in that, and really interested in helping students find ways to see what their strengths are and take that and put it into a post-secondary career.
I love that, Mary. Thank you so much. So many pearls of wisdom to capture there as well. I want to have Ryan Reyna from ESG introduce himself. And Ryan, if you would tell him a little bit about ESG's role in this work group effort as well, please.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and afternoon, everyone. So Ryan Reyna, I'm a senior director at Education Strategy Group. We are a small mission-based consulting firm that does a lot of work with states and communities across the country and trying to build better bridges between K-12 higher ed and workforce. And we are serving as some back office support, research support, content support, just to be able to bring some national perspective of what we've seen in other communities to these conversations. And really just to help you guys when you say, hey, we want to learn more about X, Y, or Z, we'll be the ones that are able to go do that on your behalf. So really excited about participating. And you'll probably also see a few of my other colleagues through different elements of the meetings as we're trying to keep ourselves spread thin across all of the different work groups.
We're so glad you're here. Thank you to everyone. I always worry a little bit when we start with introductions in a group like this. It takes a little bit more time, but I really wanted us to lean into it today, just like you did. So thank you for that. I want us to work together as a highly effective team. And I think that starts with us just getting to know each other, just based on the aspirations and passions I heard from your introductions today. So thank you for taking the time to do that. My name is Lou Young. Lou is spelled funny, just L-U. I'm a lifelong Kentuckian, and I've had the best experience I can think of in that I spent 31 and a half years in P-12 education, and I've been just started my 7th year at UK. Barry Lee, I can't believe it. I'm an associate professor in the College of Education at the University of Kentucky, but I have this really cool side hustle where I chair the Kentucky Board of Education. So was appointed by the governor in December of 19, and we have a really an amazing team there tending to the work of P-12 education. But one of our ex officio board members is Dr. Erin Thompson of the Council for Postsecondary Education. So this work is that that pipeline work, and I love it so much. And I've had a CPE filled day, so that's so much fun. But I really think we do have the all-star team here. Please don't tell the other 2 work groups, but man, we hit the mother load in terms of skills and expertise and interesting folks on this group. So I'm thrilled about that. I'd like to ask Jennifer now to talk about a process that we're going to use, a parking lot process that we're going to use in Google Docs to make sure that if there is an introvert in this group, I'm not sure I detect one, but if there is, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to provide written feedback along the way. So Jennifer, if you would take us there, please.
Absolutely. And Dr. Ellis just posted a link in the chat for the Google Doc. So if you'll take a minute, really this is going to serve as our parking lot, but I might even encourage you, kind of in my dorky sense of thinking about this as being more like a sandbox, because we're going to challenge you while you're putting some thoughts down. We will return to it, and it's okay to get in there and get messy. And the idea is that hopefully this is something with Dr. Young's leadership that you guys will really kind of craft some solid actionable plans and solutions and really kind of drive the work of the work group going forward. So as you have thoughts, as people are sharing information or discussing, or maybe they're even thoughts that you've had even in coming into today, please go ahead and share those in that parking lot, and we will definitely make sure throughout the meeting that we return to those.
Excellent.
Yes, and so before we actually move on, if it's okay, Dr. Young, I just want to highlight the agenda for today, just so you guys have an idea of where we're going. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, so you have a copy of this, but just highlighting. So obviously we're beginning with a welcome and our purpose. What we'll get into, Amanda shared a little bit about the purpose of the work group. Before we move much further, we're going to talk, and Ryan was super humble. Let me share that. I want to equate him to, we might just call him the superhero. And I know if you have not worked with Ryan, you're going to find that to be very true. So we are so fortunate to have him. So he's next up on the agenda, and he's going to prime us to be thinking about all these different things that we might tackle till the end of the year. So he's going to give us that foundational kind of background, institutional working knowledge, so that we can really move forward and think about what it is that we're charged to do. So from there, just that, we're going to move into some work group goals and deliverables. And there was a document that I shared with you all that was kind of a high level overview of what the continuum kind of drafted some thinking around in terms of actions and a timeline and so forth. So we'll kind of touch on that as well. And then we'll kind of really move into more of a more rich discussion around the research and thinking about some of the next steps that might be coming in the near future, like focus groups that might even help us refine some of the lingering questions and tasks that might be out there. And then we'll end today, obviously, thinking about our next steps and what information we might need at the next meeting. So with that, if that's okay, I think we'll turn it over to Ryan, if you're ready for us.
You teed him up well.
Perfect. And I am no superhero, so please don't get any false pretenses. I just want to, as I'm pulling this up to share, start by saying that we're gonna, I actually need privileges to share my screen. So what we're hoping to do is throughout this process, just provide some, zoom out, what are other places doing based on some key issues that we've heard come up through previous conversations. And so this first set of slides is really going to be driven by some of the initial conversations that we had at the full CEC level, which were around the transition space. We're really around starting first and foremost with those direct transitions from high school. I'm saying that recognizing that we do also have lots of other information on the adult transition into post-secondary, and we will bring those to bear as well based on some of the early conversations that we've had. There's also a lot more behind this. So this is really, I think, intended to be a quick snapshot, and we can dig much deeper into all of these. But before we get started into the what, just again, grounding ourselves in some data nationally, first, I think is helpful. We are seeing a pretty big overall decline in undergraduate enrollment, FAFSA completion, and ultimately students are, especially the current seniors, have had to make some pretty significant changes to their post-secondary plans, which these data sort of show what happened last fall. And I think in particular, the FAFSA numbers are signaling some things, some worrisome trends that may happen next fall. And so I think this group is really poised to be addressing how do we make sure that that those losses don't continue moving forward. So what that means for Kentucky, so Kentucky itself saw about a 7% decline in enrollment overall. At the same time, you've seen kind of a college going rate that has stayed relatively flat for the past few years. So you have these sort of competing trends that are not pointing in the right direction ultimately for what we're all here trying to do. And the FAFSA, these numbers actually are about a month behind. Your numbers have actually gone up since this last poll that we had. But in essence, what we're seeing is still fairly consistent declines. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about some of the efforts that are underway in Kentucky to close this gap, including a very fun TikTok challenge that if you haven't had a chance to follow along, I highly encourage. You get to see Dr. Thompson dancing and rapping and doing lots of fun things. Similarly, just, this is not just at the kind of whole scale level. As you all know better than I do, within the Commonwealth, there are some significant challenges in terms of performance when it comes to race and ethnicity and income status as well. And so what you're seeing here is that that there are those differences between the different student groups, and that unfortunately those numbers have declined a little bit in the past year, and all of this is pre-pandemic. And we know that the impacts of the pandemic are even worse for students of color and low-income students based on the data that we've seen thus far. So what does that mean, and what have states been doing to try to bring forward more support in the transition space? I like to think of, and this may be a little bit of a kitschy kind of setup, but I really like to think of the transition space as that sort of relay race, right? That we are doing a lot of work in K-12, we're running, and far too often we're taking the baton, and instead of handing it off to someone, we're throwing it across a gap and hoping that they catch the student. And so how do we build that sort of acceleration in a way that the handoff is actually warm and supportive and putting people on the right track? So I'm going to talk about 3 different elements around that. The first is sort of the awareness piece, because there was a lot of conversation in the first CEC meeting about how do we make sure that students are aware of their options? How do you bring more capacity to the system? And then finally, what are the policy type change and other changes that could be helpful for making sure students don't get tripped up by different barriers?
Hey, Ryan, would you be okay with unmuting and questions as we go? Also using the parking lot is an option. Whatever you guys need from Ryan, be sure you avail yourself of his superpowers.
The one note I will make is just in this setup, I can see that people are chatting, but I can't actually access the chat. So if someone has a question in the chat, if Lou or Jennifer or Amanda, you want to just pop that to me, that'd be great.
Sure.
I will be glad to relay.
Thank you.
So the first place I want to start is something that Dr. Thompson talked a lot about, and we had a lot of conversations about last time, which is how do we actually know what are the key steps that students can and should be taking that would set them up for long-term success? And we, ESG, last year actually put together a report on this very question. So we did a national scan of communities that were being particularly successful with getting Black, Hispanic, and low-income students into higher education, and looked at what were the pillars of the metrics that they tried to identify and hold themselves accountable for. And that came to these 8 measures, all the way from sort of focusing on early 9th grade GPA through ensuring that students are having access to those advanced courses and that they are enrolled in and accessing high quality pathways that set them up for success moving into higher education. The second element was really around the post-secondary application space, and some of this was already named, ensuring that students have those applications completed, that they're completing FAFSA, and then ultimately that they're making good, strong matches with colleges that fit their academic profile and their interests. Seamless enrollment really gets at sort of the mention of summer melt, knowing that anywhere from 20 to 40% of students indicate that they are going to head to college or to some successful post-secondary education and training option, and yet never matriculate. So it's incredibly important to track that. And then ultimately that students are starting off in a positive way directly into gateway kind of credit-bearing courses rather than remediation. So we are seeing more and more communities sort of take on these sets of measures to think sort of proactively about how to structure support in very specific procedural ways.
So Ryan, Jennifer, Amanda, and I are back channeling about how much we love that slide and that notion around momentum metrics. So for me, the opposite of momentum, of course, it makes me think of inertia and how many times I think of 18-year-olds or adult freshmen who just get stuck. So Amanda or Jennifer are going to post a question about that over in the parking lot if folks would like to start engaging around that slide as well. Proceed. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've got much more information about the communities that have been able to drive each of these numbers up as well, so we can bring that knowledge to bear. An example of how that's sort of translating is in trying to help students and families understand what those key steps are and really encouraging and directing the communications to them. So one example of that in Indiana, their 21st Century Scholar Program, which has been around for a number of years and has been highly successful, they actually literally require students to do 12 steps across their 9th through 12th grade experience to be able to access those funds, recognizing that they are the highest leverage kind of movements for awareness and for application and for preparation. You've got your own TikTok challenge, which is a great example of a state who is saying, we know FAFSA is a huge predictor and proxy for likelihood to move on into higher education. So let's attack and target that. Similarly, Tennessee has been doing a campaign as well around enrollment and around summer melt. So I think you're seeing this sort of notion collectively among states that there are some key procedural steps that not only do we need to define them, but we have to really get out the word about what those are and why they matter. That looks both at direct to student information while also thinking about how do we train up the individuals within the system to make sure that they have the resources and access to information to be best supporting students. Texas has a wonderful, what they call their on-course set of resources, which is free for any counselor in the state. It literally has an entire curricula that they can access around college and career readiness, around some of those key measures that have been defined. And Colorado is probably the state that has done some of the greatest work on training around career conversations. And it's not just focused at the counselor level. They go out and do training to workforce boards, to chambers, to others around where do you fit. Everyone has a role to play in having career conversations with students. Where do you fit within that role? Here's a set of resources to make you aware of what's available at the state level, at the school level, at the individual level. And so a good way to empower those individuals. Moving on to how do we think about increasing capacity? We are seeing a movement and a strong movement towards thinking about state level policy actions to expand the number of individuals that are able to provide that direct advising and mentoring support. The data are pretty clear that when students are able to build relationships and have increased social capital, they're much more likely to engage proactively and productively beyond high school. So you've seen Tennessee and Arizona and Michigan and a handful of others that have launched sort of statewide post-secondary advising corps. Also, you have a college advising corps national, which I'm sure has some clear connections with a couple of different institutions in Kentucky. We're also hearing a number of states that are thinking about how do you, to the point earlier around the counselor training, how do you actually build professional learning opportunities to expand and support the capacity of individuals that are already in the system beyond what training they may have previously received. And then also the third direction that this is headed is around trying to better leverage technology, whether that be texting platforms to try to attack some of the summer melt issues. Certainly we've seen chatbots that have come about in Washington, Arizona, Texas, a few other places where they're helping to try to triage support for students so that they can interact with them on their own time, ask questions, and then when the chatbot can't answer a question, it gets lifted up to an individual advisor to work with a student. We've also seen, this is more locally, but Miami-Dade is a great example of specific institutions who are doing outreach in partnership with their communities to try to support students and better leverage the money and the capacity at the higher ed institution for actually helping students see their vision for the future. So Miami-Dade Community College, which I believe is the second largest community college system in the country, partners with the Miami-Dade school system to actually place individual advisors on each of the campuses. And they receive pre-college advising, not necessarily even directly connected to enrollment at Miami-Dade, but just generally about helping them determine what their next path is. And then if students do select to move to Miami-Dade, they have a individual that stays with them through that summer and transitions them into the full advising system at the institution, which has increased and stays with them for the next 2 years, which has been able to increase their retention and ultimately their graduation rate as well. And then finally, last piece is around ways to better facilitate and make it easier for individual students to enroll. Idaho is an example of this. This is a somewhat complicated graph, but let me talk you through it. Essentially what they did 4 or 5 years ago is say, any student that has met a specific cutoff within the state on GPA and their assessment scores will automatically receive admission to our institutions. So they, instead of requiring students to apply, they send them a letter that says, you've met the criteria, we want you to come to our institution. Please, go in, log into, you'll see on the next page, log into our online system and tell us you want to come. So it's much more taking the proactive approach to really do the outreach in a way that's significant. These numbers show some of the immediate enrollment change. What I think is most useful is there was a study that came out after about 2 years of having this in place, and the students that were most likely to take advantage of this opportunity were those that were low income and Hispanic. So they pointed directly to the letter as a reason why they were encouraged to move on. So great opportunity for thinking about some of those more automatic policy ways to make this happen. And we're seeing the entire Dallas Community College system has just done that as in the pandemic. CUNY is in a pilot stage for a direct admissions approach. So that's the New York City Community College system. And the state of Minnesota has asked for about $1 million for doing that statewide come next year. So it's slowly gaining steam. And then the last piece that I would point to is around sort of common applications as a way to standardize and limit some of the barriers that may exist to enrollment. So both Texas and Idaho have done this, and a number of other states have as well. It's essentially taking the idea of the National Common App and putting all of the state level institutions in one place so that students don't have to search around, and it opens the door to more institutions. Similarly, what it's not shown here, a couple of states have begun work on having common financial aid award letters across all institutions so that families and students are able to better understand what the true costs look like from one institution to another, which can often be a challenge when you're getting a letter that is difficult to interpret. And then finally, what we're seeing in particular in this space around COVID and the recognition of students having significant gaps in learning as a result of the pandemic is to think about ways to use the summer to bridge their academic and even advising needs to help them transition into higher education. Texas College Bridge is one example of this that happened last summer. The state used its Governor's CARES Act, the GEAR dollars, to launch a program that provided sort of just-in-time ELA and math training and support, and connected them with specific advisors and created incentives for students. If they completed those programs, they received small sums for scholarship to be able to then enroll at any institution within the state. And I believe they had about 9,500 students that took advantage of that, and many more that were able to demonstrate their college readiness and ultimately enroll. So good opportunity for trying to bridge the space between high school graduation and college enrollment, recognizing that it often is a large barrier. And finally, I just wanted to put this sort of slide up. Tennessee gets a lot of credit over the last few years, but just to sort of say, how do you bring all of this together? And I think they're the state that has been really a sort of shining light for the transition space over the past few years. And we tried to group the moves that they took into 3 big areas: owning that handoff between the 2 sectors, creating the support, and then looking for ways to really align at scale. And what you've done, what you see here, and I'll let you guys, you can after the fact look at some of this, is a sort of vision for support that is making sure that students have the kind of capacity that is needed to be able to both help them on the awareness side, but actually get them through each of those procedural steps that were named earlier. And that has led to significant increases in direct enrollment after high school, and ultimately has ticked up their post-secondary attainment rate quite a bit. So with all of these, with the concerted effort, I think it can lead to pretty significant gains. And so I'm really excited about what this group charge is asking of the state, because I think collectively, once all of these policies and suggestions come together, it really can lead to improvements that we're all hoping to see.
So Ryan, one of the questions that did pop up in the Google document was talking about outcomes. Because specifically, it was mentioned about Tennessee, but are you aware of any outcome data of impact of these efforts?
Yeah, so I can get impact data on almost all of these. So I guess I'm happy to provide that. What I would say is you are seeing a lot more drive, for instance, in FAFSA in FAFSA rates, for instance, in a number of states around their concerted efforts. And it's very clear that with a focus, you can move that number. Similarly, with a deep focus on applications, you can see that number increase significantly. So in each of these ways, we only really shared different examples where we do have some of that impact data, because I think at the end of the day, it's got to be driven by not only what's interesting, but ultimately what has proven to be a promising practice.
Excellent, thank you. There was a more granular question too in the parking lot, Ryan, around wanting to hear more about this idea of the importance of 9th grade GPA.
Yeah, that's one of my own personal favorites. So I didn't give any of my background, and I apologize for that. I worked at the National Governors Association for about 7 years doing policy work, and then went and ran the accountability system for the state of Delaware through Race to the Top. And one of the key elements that was in our focus was really around that 9th grade space, recognizing how important it is for graduation. And then ultimately, we've gotten even more data recently about how important it is for moving into post-secondary education. So research out of Chicago is pretty clear, and they've been replicated in a number of locations, that students that fall off track in 9th grade are much, much less likely to ultimately complete high school and move on. And so really tracking that GPA and the number of, at the end of the day, it comes down to attendance and course credits and oftentimes behavior as well. But really the way that you can take a crack at it in a kind of a higher level is to really monitor how many students are getting those courses completed in 9th grade, because once they fall off the course completion, they're going to be in a cycle of trying to recover, and it's very difficult to catch back up. So lots of work right now across the country and trying to address that in different strategies to make that happen.
I'll just geek out a little bit on that. That work around Redshirt Freshman was some work I did when I was still a superintendent, and a lot of compelling research around the impact of unmet transitional needs on high school freshmen, and then all of that compounding deficit that you described that happens at that point forward. So that's Saracen, some of that research. So we might want to look at that as well. Robert Balfens too. So thank you. taking a look at the parking lot. Thank you so much for the engagement there. Keep going. We're going to capture all of this information, but it's really helpful. And a lot of folks kind of responding to various elements of your presentation. I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to go ahead and put it on the table because we talked about it at the Continuum meeting too. But just for clarity, Ryan, how do you describe the similarities and the differences between directed missions as a notion and test optional as a notion? I know they're not the same thing, but they sure are kissing cousins. So if you would say a little bit more about that for me.
Yeah. You're really getting into the weeds and I love it. So I will geek out here as well. All right. So directed missions is a strategy for outreach to smooth the sometimes challenging efforts of applying to and enrolling in higher education.
The hoops.
You can do directed missions without assessment. That is a technical way in which you identify which students are ready to go to which institutions. The admissions question in terms of assessment can be done separate and distinct from direct admissions, right? So test optional is what we saw almost every institution move to as a result of pandemic, which was submit your GPA, submit a portfolio of your work, submit your traditional, essays and things of that nature. You're not required to submit SAT or ACT. Certainly some were still allowed to, you were allowed to send it if you had it. The test optional also becomes a conversation when you start to get into, there's also multiple measures of placement. So once you have been admitted, whether or not you place into credit-bearing coursework, for many, many years, that has been based on an assessment. The mood in higher ed is moving away from that as a singular decision point and rather to focus on a set of measures, which is sort of a corollary of the set of measures idea for the test optional admission side. So
perfect.
That's a lot, that very detailed, and I apologize if I wasn't clear in describing how those things lay out, but they're all intertwined. You were right, because you could have test optional with multiple measures of placement in a direct admissions scenario, or you can have each of those things individually.
Excellent. Thank you. That was very helpful for me. A couple of other folks have posted over in the chat. If you want to unmute and add any of those to this conversation before we pivot to goals, then we have, you did a great job getting us back on schedule, Ryan. So we have a couple more minutes to linger with Ryan if you have more questions.
I have a question, Ryan. Do you feel like a lot of the changes that you're seeing, like what you just mentioned around whether or not they have to take an assessment at a community college or any college to be placed versus looking at a more holistic number of measures, are those being driven by equity or is it something else?
Yes, and I think yes to equity, yes to the pandemic, without a doubt. That is very clear. I think there also is just a sense that people started actually looking at the data and trying to figure out what was working and what wasn't working. And it wasn't just, the Black students or the Hispanic students aren't doing well on these assessments. Everybody wasn't doing well on the assessments. Certainly Black and Hispanic were doing worse, right? But once people started to think, well, can we just place them into a credit-bearing course and give them some additional support, right? The idea around co-requisite started to take off and have seen massive improvements in the number of students that are gaining that first credit in the allotted time. You are seeing large systems, entire states who are saying we're no longer forcing kids to sit for AccuPlacer. We will do, as California as a whole is doing multiple measures around placement, right? So if the CSU and the community college system in California can do that, I'm pretty sure any other state system across the country can do that as well.
Thank you. Any more questions for Ryan?
What can I say? One last thing, Lou. It's
hang
really just a question back to the group, which is obviously this is a beginning conversation, and we're going to be part of the reason we're here is to listen to the other things you guys are interested to be able to bring experience and examples to the conversation in the future. If there are clear research questions or clear things that you guys want to learn more about, please also drop those into the parking lot so that we can make sure that we are supporting you in that way.
Excellent. Another really timely reason for Ryan's presentation today too is because we have these 3 work groups. We wanted to help kind of level set our conversation around our charge, which is transition to post-secondary, and how that is different from the charge around early college opportunities. And there are lots of places where we know those things will bleed over into one another, but I think really getting this sense of what other states' efforts are underway will be really helpful to us as we kind of clarify our work together. All right, thank you so much. Every time I hear you, I have a dozen more questions, but all in due time, we will get to that. And some more of this popping up over in the parking lot too, Ryan. So we'll monitor that as we move forward as well. So at this point, we wanted to be very intentional and purposeful around getting to our goals. So the next item then on our agenda, sorry, it's stuck for me a minute. Thank you, is to discuss work group goals and deliverables along with the research that Ryan just mentioned so that we can meet our annual targets. So Jen is going to share a high-level overview of the CEC's work group structure, take us back to the continuum at their last meeting when they've charged us with this work moving forward. So Jennifer, if you would please.
Yes, and I'm hoping you can see my screen. Fantastic. So I mentioned this earlier, and I want to be really clear and purposeful when I say that this was a document created by the continuum based on feedback each of the work group leads, so President Thompson and Dr. Young, presented about kind of what the members had said and what their hopes and wishes and aspirations were for the work groups at the last meeting. So the continuum, or Commonwealth Education Continuum, or CEC, you know, in education, we have to have all these different abbreviations, but has had 2 meetings. And so the first was really to get everything kind of set and the vision set and information put out there about the direction of where the continuum would go. And so that's when these 3 work groups really came to fruition. And so the last meeting, President Thompson and Dr. Young shared really this draft document. So again, I want to be really clear that this was created by the continuum members. So that being said, this is a working draft, and you'll see it says draft, which means you all are welcome. Here's our Happy Friday gift to you all. You all now own this. See, you're welcome. It's lots of gifts for joining this work group. You're welcome. So a couple things kind of are set in stone in that we have gone ahead, obviously, and scheduled the meeting dates. And I'm not going to go through all this again, because we don't have to stick to this, but rather this might guide or inform where we go. So some of the guiding questions that the members had are listed here, things ranging from communications with students and families, college affordability, strategies around FAFSA completion, and then obviously promoting student retention, credential and degree attainment, and so forth. So the other key, the other component is really around some of the sample goals. And again, these may not be things that you all decide are important to you all, and that is just fine. Again, it's a working draft. So this really kind of hinges around a lot of the things that we just talked about. So identifying additional data and feedback needed to move forward, looking at other strategies that people are currently using, whether it's in the field in Kentucky or nationally, and then issuing recommendations to the continuum. So you see some potential research questions. As Dr. Young and both Ryan have suggested, this will be really key in how we move forward in our meetings, whether it's that you need additional information just to get that baseline of information, to have conversations at the next meeting, or maybe it's that you want to consider some sort of policy recommendation or communication action. But the thing that's really crucial, and here's kind of one of the sections that we've got to gain some kind of agreement around, are these kind of milestones that we're looking at in terms of the work group and what we really need to bring back to the continuum. So 3 important dates, and these are based on work on the meetings of the continuum. So by June 2021, focus groups will have been conducted to establish that baseline of data. And so we will actually between, and Ryan will talk a little bit about that, I think, be helping us conduct focus groups between, let's see, it's April and early May, so that we can bring that information back to the work group. You all can have a first stab so that we can then bring forward a recommendation towards the end of June at the next June continuum meeting on what it said. So it's that baseline of information. By September, as you all know, the legislature is looking at what its agenda is. And so what we hope to do is bring forward considerations for regulatory and statutory changes that might be things that we want to look at. So that's September. And then by December, we'll have kind of that end of the year summary report looking at whether it's a policy or communication related recommendation. And then also something that we'll have to be really conscientious about is who are the policy actors. And obviously there's lots of different, if you've noticed on the continuum, lots of different representation across the state. So who is it that we're asking to do what? And so we'll have to be really kind of tuned into that as well. So that's December. So I want to make sure kind of that makes sense and that we're in agreement. And yes, we're all about it. June, September, and December. Does that make sense? Do we see any issues? Again, it's a tight timeline. I realize.
And Amanda put a link to that doc in the chat. And Jennifer is already working on a repository for all of our documents, including Ryan's presentation from today, our agendas. I'm considering this as our charge to this work group, but keep in mind, and Jennifer is always very careful to say this, this is our work this is our Play-Doh to mold. So, so when you see at the bottom of that document suggested considerations for continuum action, we are not tied to those. In fact, we may or may not put any of those forward, but I really appreciated their efforts and support from ESG to say, here's what this might look like going forward. So if we build it, they'll come is kind of the notion there. So do take a look at that, and then we'll be moving forward, leaving it behind, but knowing that that was our original charge as a group.
Absolutely. So it's organized by actions and policies. So please take a look at that. Again, kind of why I'm being dorky about the idea of the sandbox is that it is moldable, right? And so we hope to kind of build this document as we go as well. And certainly we'll continue to add to the documents and attachment section as we move on too. So with that, I think Dr. Young, that takes us back to maybe going back to that parking lot or sandbox, as you will.
Perfect. Yes. Yes. We're going to officially change its name in your honor to Sandbox, Jennifer. I like it. So everybody seems to be managing Google Docs. Okay. So if you would go ahead and click on the parking lot and open that back up, let's turn our attention there for a few minutes. Also keep in mind, you just heard Jennifer talking about the fact that we can ask for more data, especially focus groups. So when we take a look at this, be thinking about the kind of existing research that you might be interested in consuming, as well as how we might move forward gathering some contemporary just-in-time data for this work as well, so that we can really leverage as much information in a short amount of time as we possibly can. I've got too many windows open. I'm just now getting to the parking lot. Jennifer, I'm sorry. All right. We might want to go ahead and put that up there just as a guide as we talk through. But our conversation at this point is to riff on what we've already begun to put into the sandbox and to think more specifically about what is emerging from our thoughtful time together today to begin thinking about what some of our key goals may become as we move forward. So if you would take a look at that.
Dr. Young, did you say you did want to pull that up to share?
Yeah, let's do, just to call people's attention to any item that folks may want to highlight together on that as well. But don't let the fact that it's on the screen stop you from using your own doc or adding to it. Let's just play in the sandbox a bit. So we've touched on some of this, Ryan. I definitely want to hear more about this idea. Somebody called them buckets, but this idea around momentum metrics and what we might know about that in Kentucky as well.
Lou, one thing I would add here is just to the earlier comment, and I'll drop the link to this report into the chat. It really was framed in a larger view of some data work that we did to try to get a handle on the number of schools across the country where if you're Black, Hispanic, or low income, you have less than a coin flip's chance of moving into higher education right after high school. And that number is about 7,000, or about a third of all high schools across the country. And so I think really driving down to your own data to better understand where some of those gaps are, it was something I would encourage to be, collectively. It doesn't necessarily need to be just this work group, but collectively to really understand where some of the biggest gaps are within your own Commonwealth would be a critical thing to start with.
Agreed. I really want that, Ryan, please. At the same time, I know when we move forward, we're going to be sensitive to the notion that we're not going to lead with the gaps. We're not going to lead by heaping coals on the folks that have been most marginalized and underserved by the population. But we have to lift the lid and look at what's really happening. So that critical attention will be important. I'm going to hush. Everybody else, just unmute, please, or keep working in the parking lot and talk to Jennifer, Amanda, Ryan, and me about what's emerging for you today, please.
I have a question.
Carolyn.
Should we be thinking about current existing resources in terms of budgeting, staffing, those kinds of things? Because what I'm thinking about when I see a lot of this data is to implement a lot of these programs, we would need a very big increase in staff and funding. And part of my interest in what I do in getting K-12 students interested in health careers and then moving them into our programs is that our admission staff doesn't have the capacity to reach all the students in our region. And so I see part of my position not only as providing this community resource, but helping students understand what college really is and that they are able to go. And looking at those like non-traditional positions who are also doing admissions work essentially, or guidance. Like, how are we thinking about what those resources are? How do we define those? Do we have to advocate for more funding? Like, how does that, should we be thinking about all of those things right now?
That was a lot, Carolyn. I think about it just in rank and file high schools now. We have college and career coaches, and we've finally paid attention to the fact that having 3 or 4 high school guidance counselors is never going to be enough. But who are those people, and what do we know about allocated resources? So I think a general question that I hear, Jennifer, is around some kind of a resources scan. What do we know about P12 and state level and higher ed resources that are being attached to this question? But I also heard, and Carolyn, if this isn't well repeated, correct me on it, but I also think I heard there, should we also be taking stock of all of the organizations that are helping to attack this project right now, or this problem right now too. I mean, we've got Gear Up, we've got ACU, we've got each individual institution, we've got the Department of Education, et cetera. So do we have a good sense of who all of the collaborative actors are, at least as they exist right now? I saw some interesting things in Tennessee that it looks like we don't have in Kentucky. So, so if we know what we do have, then maybe the next question is, what don't we have?
I think that's a great summary, because I don't even know all of the folks who do this non-traditional outreach on my own campus.
There you go.
So having a statewide idea of who is reaching out to these students, and then are we doing the same work? Should we be doing the same work? Is there overlap? If there's overlap, is that good? Do they need to be smacked over the head with this over and over and over again?
Yeah.
Or do we need different approaches? It would just be really interesting to see how many of those programs are making an impact in like how they're doing it.
Yeah, so I mean, efficiencies, gaps, and redundancies in terms of how much we're throwing at the problem. Super helpful.
Dr. Young, can I add something to that?
Yeah, jump in, Barry.
Is there information, you brought up things like the college coaches. Where across the state is the equity for different schools and school districts from P12 of, do we have certain parts of the state that have more college coaches than other parts of the state, to not just to ensure the transition is there, but to ensure that the planning stages are there, or the community-based work transition coaches, or the schools that have Gear Up? I know that's grant-based, but you know, how much more success are we seeing with students that went through those programs versus schools that do not have those programs? And so does it become an equity issue of the advising that's took place prior to going to secondary?
Yeah, I mean,
soon maybe.
Yeah, when I think about a map of the Commonwealth, Barry, and think about just access to post-secondary institutions, access to career technical institutions, then adding access to advisement, all of those things do become a geographical equity kind of question, also very tied closely to those resources we just talked about. Yeah, this audit or map is the way Stephanie referred to it. Yeah, and you know, beginning to at least ask those kinds of questions. But I really appreciated that where you got to in that statement too, Barry, was not just who's got them and how many, but what do we know about the impact? Super helpful. I also think I want to pitch just a question around if we started asking some who questions. We started out talking about earlier about students, or youth and adults with disabilities. I definitely want to know more about that. Ryan already suggested that we need to dig much more deeply into our data, but that's a population that I would like to explore a little bit further, since we often don't disaggregate by disability at the point of transition. That made me think too of Mary and Emery's comments earlier about adults moving into post-secondary for the first time too. So again, just some more data around who it is that we're trying to support. Other thoughts about the sandbox?
You know, I have an artistic brain, so sometimes, you know, I might move a little bit differently than everyone else. But I know that whatever direction that we go in, or whatever we talk about, one thing that we need to think about as we're moving forward when it comes to the accessibility of the assistance, that whatever direction that we go in, we kind of have to, I think sometimes we forget about how we communicate about the services that we do have. You know, a lot of people are unaware of the services that we do have. They're unaware of where to look. And then when they're given direction, it is in flowery, scholarly language that many of the people that we serve don't understand. I see Stephanie, we're soul sisters already. I get it. And because I've spent a lot of time over the years having to translate because we approach everyone the same and not everyone has the same level of understanding. And really, it's not even that they aren't able to understand. It's just the way that we need to communicate. We need to be able to communicate in a way that it is understandable for everyone so that when they do get the assistance or when they're led to where they can get some help for transition, that they're able to do so without being so confused.
I just have to say, Mary, you are, yes, yes. And I think to that point, there's also something for me here of, I am still just like blown away by the rigor of that presentation that we saw and the research. I think the and that I'm always trying to push myself to think about is that all feels very contained within like the school or like the school system. And when you think about like, if I'm a kid in rural Eastern Kentucky and there's a lot of great community colleges or colleges, but if I have to drive 55 minutes to get there, yeah. Right? What are those and I know you're shaking your head, Dr. Young, so I know you know from your experience in education, but how does this group really think about what are all of those external things that family engagement, right? Like cultural and community beliefs about post-secondary education. And I'm just thinking, how can we really be creative and thorough in research and insights about, how do things like transportation impact students' ability to access post-secondary? Yeah. But mostly it's coming off mute to say, Mary, I hope everyone in the Commonwealth of Kentucky heard what you just said. Yes.
So we can all shout amen from time to time if we want to do that. Sarah is amening in the chat as well and asking how do we measure it. So yeah, Mary, Stephanie, I'll never forget I had 2 different students and I'll describe them without giving away anything confidential about them. But both of these students ended up with excellent scholarships, both of them children of cyclical, generational, abject poverty. And they both let go of the scholarship. So when we started to dig into it, using human-centered, empathetic, interviewing techniques, we found out that one girl was so obese that she went to visit her new school and saw that she was not going to be able to fit in the desks in the classroom that she happened to visit. She knew in high school that her teachers always provided her a table in the back of the room where she could sit, but she was convinced she was not going to get that kind of treatment in college, and so she chose not to go. The other was a young man who who experienced exactly what Stephanie was talking about, had a scholarship, worked really hard to make a fairly short drive into town every day to BCTC, but could not consistently afford the gas to make it in. So handed him tuition on a silver platter, but didn't think about what else it took in his life to make sure that he was going to be able to be there on a regular basis.
And I think you bring up a really good point there from I'll use the term fitting in. We send a lot of students to different universities across the state, as most school systems do. And you have that conversation and they always say, I just didn't fit in, whether it be from skin color to dialect to being in a more affluent circle of people, because now they're at the secondary level. And we get a lot of that information back sometimes when we see students that are not progressing through. And there are some of those obstacles of, and it's really not at any fault to anyone, but how do we teach the confidence of our students? You may have a twang in your voice, or your skin color may not fit in with the majority of the students in your enrollment, but you can still be successful. And that is so hard to coach. And it ties in with the term I like to use, grit. Some students, when they reach those obstacles, it's easier to give up and go back home and work than to continue to push through some of those obstacles. And again, that's just some of the conversations that I think ties into that retention rate a lot of times.
Yeah, if I can add a comment there to what Barry just said, the college access program at Fern Creek, he brings the students that are in college, he brings them in every December and they all come in wearing a sweatshirt or t-shirt from where they go to school, and he divides them up, and they do for the current high school students that are participants in the program, and he has about 40 to 50 per grade. They all do these panels for the college students. They're the panels for different topics, and some of it is academics in college, some of it is social, some of it is financial, and it's just an amazing opportunity for these kids to talk to kids that went to their high school and graduated in the last 1, 2, 3 years, and hear how they are adapting, and that it can be hard, or how do you find resources. And I sat in as just an observer, and I mean, it was amazing.
And this is Shauna, just to kind of re-emphasize the comment Dr. Young just made, especially when you're working with adult learners. I mean, you can offer them free tuition, a tuition scholarship, and that is just the tip of the iceberg for them in terms of being able to take advantage of a program. They have, you know, all of those additional barriers. They may not even be able to afford the books and the tools when we're trying to enroll them in these technical work-ready scholarship funded programs. The financial cost builds on top of the tuition, and then there's the opportunity cost issues to
Absolutely, Shauna, and not to mention the childcare for the mothers. That's another issue that I'm passionate about. We can tell them that they need to transition all day long, but if they don't have appropriate, affordable childcare, how are they going to progress forward? So that's another cost that's associated with post-secondary.
So I've heard a lot of interest in data around money, and we would be remiss if we didn't consider that in terms of the actual cost of post-secondary learning beyond tuition. What are the actual costs, and how do we think more about wraparound services and the engagement of interagency services in such a way that we can support students, young people, and adults returning to college in that endeavor. Because just like Shauna said, there are real costs, and then there are opportunity costs that they have to forego and consider when they're making that move. We've heard about wanting more data around targeted populations. There's some interest in the chat, myself included, around thinking about our focus groups to include some human-centered, empathy-based interviewing processes. I don't know, what kind of resources we have on our team to do that, but I know the Department of Ed is doing some of that work now. So we should be able to find support for that effort as well. I've seen some, Sean has mentioned in there some work of the Posse Foundation. I don't know that work. Students from urban poverty that could apply. So I love that we're uncovering so many models that we might want to look at as well. So Ryan, if we can keep that work going, foundation kind of work, regional and state level efforts that we might want to emulate. Questions around inclusivity, diversity, equity, and inclusivity that might be barriers to transition. Barry suggested measuring the social emotional impact of, oh, maybe I should ask you more about that question. I thought I understood it at quick glance, but say more about that changing to college.
I think it ties in what I mentioned and what several have kind of tied to. I think sometimes the transition's there. We've got you scholarship, we've got money, poof, you're off. And then they're sitting in a college dorm room and they don't have the circle of friends they had when they were in school. They don't have the parental support or the family support or the school support. And it's like, I'm here, they got me here. what do I do now? And it's, again, they've moved into adulthood, but if we're not seeing that outcome 4 to 5 years later, I think social emotional is also, it ties in again, going back to the aggression towards whether it be skin color, dialect, whatever. It's just different. And some students, again, just cannot make that adjustment, no matter what their ACT score was, whether it be high and some low.
Yeah. Some
come back because of that social and emotional impact on them of I am out of my circle and now I'm somewhere new.
I got to jump in here. To Barry's point, that is exactly what Posse does.
Okay.
The difference, and give me 30 seconds here. The name Posse comes from the research that this woman named Debbie Beal did on why students of color who got full rides to Ivy League institutions were stopping out, right? So that was her graduate research. And it coalesced for her in a moment when a young man said, excuse me, I could have made it if I had my posse, but I didn't, right? And so academically, he was fine. He just couldn't deal with the social isolation, right? And so what she discovered was if she could send groups, and this is where the specifics of it kind of break down for us, right? If she could send groups of 10 students to Harvard or Yale, and she specifically started looking at small liberal arts colleges, which is where I got familiar with their work, their success rates are higher than majority students with better grades because they're well prepared and they're going in groups of people who can relate to exactly. So she'll send 10 students from Boston who've been cultivated for a year and put through some programs to help them adjust. They go together to the same college, right? And so they'll go from DePaul or from Boston to DePaul, and she'll send kids from Atlanta to Amherst. And I think there's some really good lessons there for us that I say break apart because part of their work is, and then you have to pay $50,000 to send each one of them, right? And so that's not a necessary part of what we're doing. But I think this issue of the young lady you mentioned who came home because she felt obese, that's the kind of thing they're really good at keeping those kids in school and keeping kids from Appalachia who feel like their accent isolates them. It's a way to keep those kids persistent. I think it'd be worth some
well, and if I can tack on to that, I think if we can't send them with their group, then we have to create the group for them, right? Once they get to wherever they are, not create it for them, but give them an opportunity to create it, provide the resources to do that. I think about it the same as new teacher mentorship and induction, right? Like new teachers you'll see a higher retention rate in a school district if they have a group that they can have that cohesiveness with. So if we can't send them with that cohesiveness, then how do we take action to build that cohesiveness for them once they get there? When I did my undergraduate work, there was a program like that you didn't go with a group, but you were with a group for quite some time at the beginning of your freshman year. And I can say that if I hadn't had that group, I may not have stayed. And I'm not sure, and I know that's in a lot of places, but I'm not sure it's as intentional as I think it should be.
Something I really appreciate about this conversation from Barry to Sean to Sherry in that pattern is that it reminds me, we often think about that 4x4 relay with the baton, and those athletes spend more time working on the handoff than they do on anything else about that competition. And so for me, that metaphor of the handoff and I don't mean this to sound resentful, but the P12 folks think, sometimes we just feel like we're beating our heads against the wall to get these kids ready to go to college, but we don't feel like college is ready to receive them child by child by child sometimes. And that's not fair. And this is not about blame, but to name that kind of concern that we often know our kids and their posse and their neighbors and their aunts and uncles, but we want them to be known on the higher ed side, the post-secondary side as well. So I think that really brings a lot of important clarity to this for me.
I think something that, this is Sarah, and I do work with Gear Up students who are mainly moving from middle school to high school and then on to college. And something that Barry said that really stood out to me is a comment about, well, they've moved to adulthood. And I think I would have to challenge that. One of the comments that I remember from a transition speaker who spoke to us at Berea about incoming freshmen was around, what's the difference between a high school senior and a college freshman? And the answer was 3 months. And sometimes we think students should grow up an awful lot in that 3 months because they're in college now or they're going to college, but it's just a 3-month period for them. And that, to your point, I think, Dr. Young, is some of the most telling work that we've had is when we have summer programs where college professors will work with their high school students. It gives them a chance to really see how nervous and maybe how young those entering freshmen are, and that their expectations for that freshman class are probably elevated in some instances as to the students' maturity when they first get there. And that's an eye-opener, and I think that's probably more of the disconnect from college professors and high school teachers, is not that they don't respect each other, but the college teachers really do expect a level of student immaturity that's just not going to show up there.
And that's a perfect example too, Sarah, of how our work bleeds into the work of the early opportunity folks. We know that when we give these kids a real shot at early college, and that so many amazing outcomes result because they begin to see that they can in fact be successful. So another one of those good overlaps, I think. I don't want to abruptly end this conversation. So any last thoughts about that? And then in the interest of time, we'll turn our attention over to Jennifer, who's a master of capturing thoughts for us and synthesizing the conversation to see if we're beginning to coalesce around our goals. But any other any other comments, final shots you want to throw in before we try to firm this up?
Lou, one last thing, just for because I didn't mention it at the top. One other part of ESG's support is going to be helping the state conduct some focus groups among students and families and counselors and principals and college professionals to hear directly from those on the ground, and to do that in a way that is reflective of all parts of the Commonwealth. So we are excited by some of the comments earlier, and really driven by the fact that we want to be grounded in individuals that are on the ground. So just wanted to name that for everyone so that they know that that's happening, and encourage you, if there are specific questions or about the focus groups generally, or about questions that you would like to ask of individuals in the communities, please also share those with us so we can make sure to incorporate them into our questioning.
And that's a great segue, Ryan. That's really where we need to take this conversation as we look at the parking lot. Then just know that these focus groups with ESG's help, again, superhero, it's happening right around the corner. And so to do that really quickly, we need your help to look at that sandbox and say, well, what are the access and barriers to post-secondary education? Who should be included in those conversations, and what are those questions? So Ryan or Amanda, I don't know if you want to say any more about the focus groups, but that is our next really big objective before we kind of close out today.
So just really what Ryan had said, the one thing I did not mention about the continuum that many of you may not know is that we did establish norms because we have 30 different role groups represented at that table. So it's not the individual so much, but it's the roles in which we brought to the table. The work is happening with those like you who are willing to serve and get dirty with the work, which we are grateful for. And one of the norms that just drove home the importance of the voice and respecting and honoring the regions of our state and how culturally diverse our state is that the norm was to hear and listen to the voices who have historically been marginalized in our education system. That is a norm we've committed to. And so not just through our focus groups and interviews, but also with our actions about how we really go about this work. And so as Ryan said, we are going regionally. So we're working directly with our co-ops and other partners to help us find folks to share their story, and not all roses and rainbows. We're asking for challenges and we're asking for bright spots, because there's really good things in our state, but there are lots of siloed good in our state without really having what you all talked about beautifully today around an asset map. It's really asset mapping of what is available that people may not even know that are available. And so we really welcome your feedback on questions you want to know more about, things you want to hear more about, because that was the desire of the continuum. Is we want to know, and don't generalize solutions that what may work in rural far west Kentucky may not be the same solution for an urban setting in Louisville or in somewhere else that just may not match. And so please honor the cultural differences in our state, the challenges and the bright spots, access points. And so really we are taking that to heart. And so we welcome your feedback on the research questions or things you want to know more about, because we're formulating that now, working with the co-op directors to start soliciting participants to begin that process. So that's the only thing I would add, but really appreciate the conversation today. It's been so incredibly helpful.
So let's get some thoughts on paper about our focus groups. With whom would we like to engage in these conversations? And how might we access them?
I'm just thinking about how a lot of us work directly with people in different parts of the system or different parts of the pipeline. So maybe if there could be, I don't mean to use the word audit so much. My mom's an accountant, should be so proud. Thinking about some sort of like, if we just got a sense of who all people had access to on a regular basis, we might be able to sort of create some diverse groupings from that. Could be a next step.
And I'm not sure how to access the population of students, but there are so many who indicate in P12 that they're on a college-bound pathway and then don't make that transition. It'd be great to find them and hear from them why.
I think that's a great example. If you have other ideas on those that are experiencing barriers to transition, that too, I think to tap into those voices would be extremely powerful.
We might be able to connect with some of the McKinney-Vento coordinators in the community who work with some of those students who are struggling, and they will often see them in the community afterwards and know they haven't gone to college. I know it's a little bit of a piecemeal way of doing it, but sometimes with those specialized populations, you can't reach them in a more systemized way.
That's a great suggestion.
And I'd also like to talk to high school counselors, thinking about Sherry's comment earlier, but in a very pointed way, to have them think about students in the last 3 to 5 years whom they knew could be successful in college in post-secondary, yet did not go, and why. So I think that they have a lot of those stories that they can share that shed a lot of light on this conversation. And Barry, I'd also like to think about that in terms of specifically drill down into what about kiddos with disabilities, and
we can get some,
what were their lived experiences around transition.
Yeah, and we have some of that data through our yo-yo reports that we receive, and I can't tell you how it is extremely difficult to contact a lot of students who have left high schools that had a disability. Extremely difficult. They fall off the map. But tying with that, on the flip side of talking with students that were prepared, even talking to advisors and some college professors that have seen students from an advising standpoint, they would probably know more of those who have dropped out. What conversations did they have, that led to that point of a student maybe telling them, I'm not going to come back next semester? Can they give us that input?
I would think they could provide some of that. And what we often hear from them is that it's non-academic barriers that prevent those folks from continuing and returning. Another possible resource, our state has a very large SNAP population on, adults, low-income adults on public assistance. That might be a source of connecting with that low-income adult population that perhaps is not, but should be in some kind of post-secondary education training path.
A lot of the colleges now have food pantries. I know NQU's is very robust, and it could be interesting to interview those, or, talk to those students in a focus group who have successfully made the transition to college, but are accessing resources that are helping them make it through.
Do you think we could speak with some of those on our campuses that are working with students that are, with some of their maybe possible mental health issues, like our mental health professionals that are on our campuses? I know there's only so much they can share, but maybe I just want to reiterate what Shauna was saying about many of the students that we talk to or that we interact with in Gear Up. The reason that they don't transition has absolutely nothing to do with their academic ability, and some of it, and with COVID and all that has happened because of the virus, a lot of our students are just having so many mental health challenges.
Related to that, I don't know what type of recruitment, how we're going to recruit, but even if it's a flyer or whatever, connect to not all, but targeting certain providers of mental health, right, within the community, so that trying to at least access those people directly. So just an invitation, if you struggle with college and go to college XYZ, would you be willing to? Just a sort of a captive audience that we know individuals going there likely already have a mental health concern and may be able to talk with us. And then another campus population, to I think Barry's point, maybe the student disability centers on campus. So I imagine that they regularly have, again, experience with students who run up against issues that may be able to provide some good insight.
If I can ask a question, largely out of ignorance, so I'm going to own up, but I know looking around, there are a lot of people here who know more about research than I do. But one of my previous institutions, I know one of the things we did when we would do exit interviews with students who were leaving was ask, why are you leaving, right? And our very strong sense was that we were often not getting the real reasons, right? I mean, they would default to can't afford it, and many times that was exactly true, but there were other things I think that we had very strong sense we weren't getting. And so I guess my question is we're attacking this problem and trying to gather both data and the more subjective feedback you get from focus groups, do we have any way of sort of making sure that what we're really getting is accurate, so that we don't create grand solutions for false problems? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it really does, Sean. And I think that that's a great question and a reminder to Ryan and team and all of us that as we design, we've got to design the interviews in such a way that we really increase the likelihood that we're going to get good quality responses, truthful responses that help get us what we need. And a lot of that is, doing it in such a way that the people whom we're interviewing feel comfortable in sharing the truth, the real story.
You know, and Dr. Young, I might remind everyone that this is one piece of the story. The other side of the story that we really need to consider is those who do transition successfully and how did they get successfully prepared? So we definitely want to make sure we capture that voice equally as much too.
Maybe the student voice team from Pritchard Committee could help identify students for us, because the trust might be there already if they've interviewed these students for their own work.
That is on our plan. Yeah. And we're really trying to think about how do we leverage organizations and individuals that are already in the community to not only do the outreach, but actually help conduct some of the focus groups themselves, so that it isn't external person coming that they don't know. So totally jive with the comments that we've heard thus far.
Ryan, I'll just add that KCTCS currently has a statewide network of about 24 what we call pre-employment transition specialists. They're based on our campuses, but they're working with special needs students 14 to 21, mostly in high schools, sometimes at the college level, but they might be of some assistance in talking through transitioning needs, obstacles of that population.
Excellent. All right, I am committed and promise to always remain committed to getting you out of here promptly at the bewitching hour of 4 o'clock today. So Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you about the next steps for next meeting. Everybody, if you would turn your attention to the sandbox. Make sure that if there are any ideas that haven't been captured in our conversation, that you take advantage of that here in the next few minutes, but it will not close. You can just keep that link, bookmark it if you need to, and feel free to continue to add to that. But we want to take some affirmative steps forward to May 7th. So Jennifer, please.
Yes, so a couple things. So to Dr. Young's point, yes, please keep adding to the sandbox. Again, we're going to mold this thing. And by doing so, we hope to really kind of inform and maybe revise that work group structure document that we kind of briefly covered in terms of the content on it. So need your thoughts. The other specific thoughts that we need some more thinking around. I think you've identified some things, and we'll go back and take a look at that. But I added a question on the Google Doc specifically at the bottom that says, what are some immediate data or research needs you would like to hear more about at May's meeting? So just be thinking about that, and please add that so we can consider how to best bring forward that information for you during the next meeting. And the other thing I want to get just maybe a little bit, maybe some thoughts or agreement around are the momentum metrics, and specifically considering our buckets. I really like that idea, and I'm hoping you do too, around the idea of prepare, apply, enroll. And I saw that there were some comments, maybe even around adding a fourth category of retain or sustain.
Or thrive.
Or thrive, yes, there you go. But maybe even thinking about incorporating those themes throughout that work group document. So I'd love your feedback on that. Maybe you want to just verbally or give thumbs up, thumbs down, or I don't really know if you want to add it to the Google document. What are you all thinking? I see some thumbs up. I'm going to do some I see lots of thumbs up. So is that okay with everyone? If maybe we'll take a stab at looking at the data today and what's on that sandbox and kind of interweaving it throughout that document, and then we'll bring it back so that you guys have something to respond and reflect on during the next meeting, if that sounds agreeable. Okay, perfect. So it sounds like we're in good shape, Dr. Young, on a plan for the next meeting, and you'll be lucky that Amanda and I will be much more quiet because we hope that President Thompson will be back to join Dr. Young and all will be well in the universe again. But speaking of our next meeting, that date, let me pull that up for you all. And we're trying to kind of keep it consistent so that you kind of have a general standing meeting. At least it's that same kind of time during the month. Our next meeting is taking place on, well, this one's a little bit different. I just lied to you, sorry. May 7th from 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern time. So just so you have that flag.
9 to 11, yeah.
9 to 11, sorry. 9 to 11. Whew.
And we will send out holds on your calendar so you have that in advance. And we'll send those out because we have those scheduled all the way out, as you all saw when you signed up, but we'll send those as holds on your calendar because we know everyone's super busy.
Absolutely.
And with
So
the, we'll send you the link to the repository where you will be able to find all of the materials in one place too.
Absolutely.
Hey, thank you so much for this engagement today. It is we're definitely the rock star cool kids table on the work group side of things. So I really appreciate your time and engagement today and look forward to seeing you again and moving this work forward. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.